Today's guest, starting with paper routes, major exits, the balance between bravado and vulnerability. Let's learn what it takes to have a successful exit. Welcome to Decision Points. I'm Doug Hudson.
I'm Scott Wood.
And man, welcome Dirk Wakeham, Operating Managing Director for Vista Equity Partners.
That's a mouthful.
It is.
That's the hardest thing I'm going to do all day today. So thank you. It's out. I'm done. By 8:15, my day's finished.
Mic drop.
So Scott, I'm not sure we've ever had 3 sockless.
I actually thought about this when I got dressed this morning. I'm like, are we going sockless or are we going socks? Because it is 38 degrees outside, you know. So you
But it's so sunny. We're filming this March 19th?
19th, yeah.
March 19th, 2024. So welcome to maybe we're joining your sockless club here. So how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. What's been going on in your family and your world these days?
You know, I've been spending a lot of time on the road traveling and, trying to manage the companies we have on the ground, work with our management teams and do what I do for a living.
Well, we're going to get into that.
Great.
Where were you raised?
I was born and raised in Southern California.
Oh.
So, as I say, I got to Texas as quick as I could.
And what age was that?
44.
So I tell people, you may be offended. You shouldn't be offended by this. I tell people, I'm not dumb. I'm just slow. So it took you 44 years to figure this out.
And it was actually, I kind of came kicking and screaming a little bit.
You did?
Yeah, we can get into it, but had a professional reason to move here and really never looked back. I thought it'd be a couple of years, but here we are 14 years later, and this is my home, and I love it here.
We're in Southern California.
I grew up in Orange County, which is kind of halfway between LA and San Diego. Yeah. It's some of the most beautiful, picturesque real estate in California, as far as I'm concerned. But it's a
where specifically? Because we both love. I mean, who doesn't love Orange County?
Who doesn't love Orange County? I grew up in a little town called Villa Park.
Okay,
it's a 3 square mile town just outside of Orange, kind of on the north side.
Okay,
we raised our family in South Orange County, in the Rancho Santa Margarita area until we moved here.
Yeah. Can you surf?
I surfed a lot as a kid. I don't think I can get up anymore.
Oh, that's like riding a bike, is it not?
So I do lake surfing now, so I can do that.
Well, y'all need to go.
That's right. Yeah, we need to have a little trip to the lake.
You're both members of YPO. Scott's a big surfer, behind a boat in an ocean, wherever. So
I would say little surfer in the ocean, big surfer behind the boat.
All right, he's afraid somebody who's a real surfer is going to call him out.
For sure.
So tell us about your family.
So I've got 2 kids, a 30-year-old and a 29-year-old. My daughter graduated from the University of Texas. She works at Oracle. She's in the software business, selling software.
And where does she live?
She lives over in Lakewood.
Okay, yeah.
And my son, he lives in Bentonville, Arkansas, and he's kind of between gigs right now.
Come on. I live in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
Lived here 28 years. Our family moved to Northwest Arkansas 9 years ago. So was he working for
I've never
Walmart?
been. He didn't do Walmart. He was working in hospitality for a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's he worked at the 21C Hotel for a hot minute. I've not been to Bentonville, but everybody says it's a beautiful town. I think the Walmart money has done a nice job of making it a pretty pleasant place.
Well, it's absolutely, they have. Obviously, Northwest Arkansas is beautiful. And then the Walton family and the organization all together, they knew investment in that region was critical to attract and retain talent. Supposedly, it's the mountain biking capital of the world.
I was going to ask, is he a mountain biker?
He's not a mountain biker, but I've heard that's a really very popular spot. It's trails and
millions, if not billions of dollars. I was talking to the new manager of the Whole Foods in Fayetteville. He moved from Austin with Whole Foods just so he could train and compete nationally on his, days off and after work in Northwest Arkansas. It's intense. I don't do it. A lot of friends do it, but it's a pretty spot. Where'd you and your wife meet?
So my wife and I met in college, Cal State Fullerton. Go Titans!
Yeah,
we
big
met,
baseball.
Actually, good memory. It's about the only thing we're known for anymore. Augie Garrido was the coach there for a hot minute as well at the University of Texas. Went and came back here and finished out his coaching career at Texas. But we've had a good baseball program.
How old are you?
I'm 58.
Yeah, I'm 58 as well. My dad, one of my favorite 10 days of the year, I'd come home from college and we'd watch the College World Series and we'd eat vanilla ice cream with chocolate syrup and peanuts on it. And Cal State Fullerton was big time at that season. That's why I know it. And
1984-ish, I think.
Yeah, is that? Yeah,
I think that's right.
Yeah, no way.
I've still not been to Omaha. It's on the bucket list of things to do here. It's a great.
Have you?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, and and Arkansas still hadn't won one, which is painful for the Arkansas folks. So, what are some memories, Dirk, that shaped you growing up?
Now, what were you into as a kid?
I was at a dinner 2 weeks ago. A friend of mine hosted a group of us in Park City, and a bunch of reasonably successful folks went around the table. I think there were 16 of us, and of those 16 people, 14 people had newspaper routes.
No way.
And we just thought it was really interesting how, early on, that was a very entrepreneurial job where you had to do sales and marketing and debt collection and operations, and you had to get labor if you were going to go do something that day to, take care of your route. And, all of us sort of lamented about growing up, having a paper route, effectively having your own business, the discipline, the work ethic required to do it was pretty interesting. So I had a paper route. I did that for 4 or 5 years, starting at age 11 or 12, I think it was. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. A lot of time doing skateboarding and
Did you really?
bicycle
Yeah.
motocross and all the things that kids did, in Southern California back then.
So, what are some distinct memories from the paper entrepreneurship?
Well, I can still remember the 2 or 3 houses on my route. When I go back home, I'll drive around, and you remember Mrs. So-and-so, would never leave you a tip and would yell at you for not putting the paper right, in the little 3 square foot area in front of her front door, so she didn't want to have to walk too far. So stuff like that. You remember, some people are very gracious and very generous. Some people are, kind of persnickety and a little bit of a challenge. And I think it's a proxy for most things you do in business. Some customers are great and some are a little bit of a challenge.
Did you, so I didn't have my own paper route, but I had a buddy who had one. There was like a monopoly in my neighborhood. It was very difficult to get the paper route. So the best
Early bird gets the worm.
The best I could do was help my buddy when he needed labor and was, out of town or whatever. And so I had this bike with this huge basket on the front, and you could fold and put, 100 papers in there, and you drive around or ride around and throw them, and then come back, fold up some more, and was that the program?
Exactly. They deliver them in flat. You had to roll them up, stick them in we had little canvas bags. A little bit of a monopoly. I ended up giving her out to my sister, who took it for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think she gave it to another friend of hers. So it was a little bit of to your point, it's a little bit of a franchise. I'm going to sell you the franchise. I don't think I got any compensation for that.
Did you charge her anything for the franchise transfer fee?
I should have.
You should have done a multiple of, cash flow on that deal.
Do you remember what you took home a week?
The paper sold for about $3.50 a month, I think, and it actually had a wholesale rate. That's going back to business. I think I paid $2.65 for every subscription. So I made $1, so we'll call it $1.10 per paper, and I think I had, 80 or 100 customers. So I was making 80 or 100 bucks a month, and 1978, that's not bad money.
Yeah, translate that. Yeah, that's decent. So I have to go here. Do you remember the movie Better Off Dead?
I do.
Do you remember? I think it was John Cusack. I want my $2. Have you seen?
No, I hadn't seen it.
Go to YouTube, because Dirk literally, when he said debt collector, I knew I was going here. It's famous scene. He's a paper route. He's the lead character. No, I guess he's not. John Cusack's the lead character. This kid has a paper route, and he is a theme throughout the movie. John owes him $2 for the paper route. And this kid shows up on the ski slopes, at his house, at restaurants, and he says, I want my $2. That was you.
Yeah, that's it. I want my $2.
Kid was probably 10 or 11 years old in the movie.
And people would hide from you. It's the craziest thing. They're home, you're knocking on the door.
They're embarrassed. They owe a kid money.
Right. And it's not like they're not stiffing the newspaper. They're stiffing the kid, because I had to pay the $2.65 for the product.
They knew your mom or dad. They were like, yeah.
They can afford it.
Well, it's interesting, I think, going back to the guys sitting around the table, that, so many had a paper route or had some sort of, I'm sure the other two probably had some kind of entrepreneurial
lawn business and some other things.
Yeah. That was it was the lawn business.
How long did you do it for?
A long time. I mean, we started 9, 10 years old, and through college, off and on. So
did you have Employees?
My brother.
Your brother? Yeah.
He was not the greatest employee.
Greg, does he owe you money? Yeah, maybe. What was his hourly wage or
I
by
don't
the
remember.
job?
I don't remember. I just remember the last summer we did it together, which was the last summer we did it together. It was like I wanted to be up at 6:30.
Yeah.
It's hot in Texas, and be done before it gets hot. And he was kind of like sleep till 10:30, 11. Roll out, do a few lawns, take a break, do a few more in the heat of the afternoon. I wanted to be done by like 10:30, so we had a little bit different style.
You were learning how to do a family business at that point. It's so funny. I wonder today, Dirk, and your kids, what would be equatable to a paper route? Because what is tapping into an early entrepreneur? Generally, you woke up early. Yeah, that hard work, entrepreneurism, self-motivation. Any jobs your kids had or you see in the marketplace that maybe translate to what that looks like today?
That was the basis of the conversation we got to in our dinner was what is the modern day equivalent of the paper route?
Yeah.
And we didn't have a whole lot. Some kids do some things on social media and have the ability to generate, some income from that. I think there's still kids doing lawn work, although I don't see it as much. But there's, the paper route's kind of gone the way of the Pony Express.
The things that I've seen are, boys in the neighborhood will wash cars.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty good.
Yep.
That's a pretty good gig.
Yeah.
But the lawn business has largely been not institutionalized, but it's been taken over by companies,
aggregators.
Yeah,
so to speak.
there's not a lot of kids pushing the mower up and down the street, knocking on doors. But the car wash deal I've seen, the social media. But I think about this a lot with my kids because I've still got one in high school, and she's definitely got an entrepreneurial kind of wiring, and so she and I talk a little bit about what could you do, but I think also the challenge is the demands on our kids' time. Like, I mean, academically, there's a lot of pressure for sure. But then, usually you're in some kind of extracurricular, whether it be athletics or theater or whatever. And then you've got this whole charitable component. Like, you've got to have so many charitable hours on top of that. And then, in our case, we've had some learning differences in our family. So there's additional tutoring and it's kind of like, when do you have time? Whereas when I think we were all in school, it was kind of like, you played a sport and you had your school, and then there was a fair amount of free time to work on this other stuff.
Scott, I think it's a really, really fair point. I think the aggressiveness to get into college now, it's almost like we've forgotten that a job or entrepreneurship would be a great item on the resume, and it's not. It's more your GPA, the academics, the social, the extracurricular. I think it's we're pulled in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
What was the next job after paper?
What was the next job after paper? I guess I went to work at Kmart. Worked in the computer department. They had a little kiosk where they sold.
How big was that computer?
Oh, well,
Was this in high school?
This was in high school.
Okay.
Yeah. And I always had an affinity for computers, and I actually used my paper route money to buy a computer early on. And so, that was kind of my thing.
Good.
What's that?
Macintosh?
No, I couldn't afford a Macintosh. I had a TRS-80, which they sold at Radio Shack, which is a good, Texas-based company that was selling computers back in the olden days.
We got Kmart and Radio Shack. Both are no longer with us anymore.
So yeah, worked at Kmart, worked in the computer area. Turns out the fellow that ran the security the security operation at Kmart came to me and said, "Hey, we've got this problem with checks. People write bad checks, and we have the system where we put them on little note cards and we give them to all the cashiers. And so when somebody comes in to buy something, they look through the note cards and see if the person is a bad check writer." He said, "No, I'd love for you to write a program to keep a list of all these people that have written us bad checks." And so I took one of the computers that we had at Kmart and wrote a little program to maintain a database at the time of people that wrote bad checks. We sorted it by first name, by last name, by driver's license. And so then every day we'd print out a new list of the bad check writers at Kmart, and the cashiers would go and take a look at the list and say, well, Dirk's a bad check writer. Sorry, we're not going to take that check. So I always joke that was my first commercial piece of software I wrote
100%
in 1982 or whatever.
That's awesome.
What was the language you were writing that in?
It was BASIC.
For 3 months, I was a computer science major at Furman. And of course, it was in the basement at this point because you had to be in a cooler underground. And on Sunday afternoon, I had a huge program, something due on Monday. And of course, I'd waited till Sunday, and I worked all day, and I didn't hit save, and I lost it. And it's the
You
most,
were like, that's it.
It's the most rage I've ever had. I told my parents if I knew y'all had so much money, I'd taken a baseball bat and just gone scorched earth. But I went on Monday and I changed my major immediately to business. I did not have the patience.
I think the lost 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours of coding is a rite of passage for everybody.
100%. You hit the dang save button until someone smarter like you figured I could just auto save. Why didn't y'all think of that sooner?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Software, where'd this love, because that's kind of been something that's been a part of your journey for forever, correct?
And that's a good question. I don't know where it came from. I think, growing up in an age where this new device was becoming available and accessible, it was still a little unique. Yeah. And I think I've always been fascinated by things that have this sort of balance of art and creativity and science. And computers in many ways, because of the creativity and the freedom you have to code things and do things in different ways with this very predictable scientific device, was an appeal to me.
Because this was all emerging, when we were all kind of growing up. What was your very first memory of a computer or the technology, or what was the original peak? I remember there was a guy that lived a block over from me, and we were buddies, and his dad had a Macintosh. And I can remember going over there and looking at it and he turned it on, and it was kind of a little bit awe-inspiring. I'm like, what is this thing? What was your first memory?
Same thing. I'd finish my paper out, and I'd drive by or ride my bike by the Radio Shack in our little shopping center by the house, and they had the thing sitting up front, and you go in there, and it was like this magical little thing, kind of all velvet roped off in the corner, and nobody kind of knew how to make it work. And there's one fellow that worked there that was a neighbor of mine, and he could make it work and showed how to boot it up and do different things, and it was just sort of it had an appeal to it.
Do you remember how much it cost?
I remember it was several months worth of paper route money. I know that.
I haven't heard Radio Shack so many times in a short amount of time. But no, seriously, Dirk, somebody's had to have done a case study on Radio Shack and Apple. Local, near you, had the computer. The technology. One just didn't stay relevant at all. I don't want to spit, but it's just so interesting. They were local. It was your first introduction. I think about my kids when the Apple Store opened up on Knox. I mean, they had the exact same awe-inspiring conversation. That's where they went to get help for technology things. So it's just interesting that Radio Shack, in a sense, had a tremendous business strategy. Obviously, we're not able to adapt to the times and everything else.
So what happened next after Kmart and the early?
Yeah. Kind of fumbled around, did a few different things. Worked for a fella installing computer security devices. Okay. We'd go to the universities and they had these big steel straps. They'd bolt the computers down to the desk so people couldn't walk off with them. Did that a bit during college, and then stumbled on an accounting firm that needed. I was an accounting major at the time. Somebody to kind of be a gopher at the tax office. So I would deliver tax returns to people. I would go get meals for the partners at night when they were hungry. But they had a computer there that was doing their billing. It was a billing computer. And they eventually said, well, hey, you know a little bit about computers. Can you help us do this billing thing? And so I went in the back, and there was a big stack of time cards that the partners would fill out, and I'd keyed it all on the computer and ran all the billing reports. And they said, boy, you're pretty sharp with computers. I said, well, I guess a little bit. And so then I shifted from being the gopher to being the computer guy running the billing system. And
during school, you were still in college.
Yeah, it was an afternoon job. And then eventually they hired a full-time person. And so I said to one of the partners, I said, well, I could use another part-time after school or after college job. Where would you recommend? He said, well, look, our biggest customer is this company called Western National. They're an apartment business company, and why don't you go over there and talk to them? So I went over and talked to them, and again, I knew how to work the computer, so they were putting in a computerized accounting system and hired me to be an afternoon part-time computer guy.
Well, walk us through that, Dirk. Yeah, because obviously you start off part-time at Western. Walk us through that kind of journey.
Yeah, so I started off working part-time, and as it turns out, they were giving me as many hours as I wanted. So I ended up going part-time for college for the last year because they wanted me to be full-time. So I went full-time and I went to night school for my last year in college, and worked with them in several of their, over a period of 15 or so years, several areas. But we had a captive property services business that provided plumbing and air conditioning and electrical service and those sorts of things to our properties. So kind of stuck with that for a very long period of time.
Does that time up with when you moved to Texas, when you leave Western?
So the first, and I know the title of your podcast is Decision Points. I think the first sort of major decision point for me in my career after spending 15 years there, I'm early 30s, I got 2 kids, I got a mortgage that I'm paying, and it occurred to me that you're not going to provide for your family long-term as an employee. And I decided that I wanted to kind of go do my own thing. And so I made the decision to leave. I was fortunate enough to have them back me in my first business venture, which was a business called Leasing Desk that was focused on automating processes around the leasing workflow. So we were doing credit checks and insurance policies and different things. So this is kind of in 2000, right about the advent of the internet. So that was my first point was, look, I don't want to be an employee. Yeah. I'm not going to create wealth for my family being an employee. I've got to work for myself in some capacity. And so, made the decision to start my own business in this sort of, .com heyday where everybody was going to get rich on the internet.
So who was the customer for Leasing Desk?
So mostly people that owned, operated, or managed apartment buildings.
Okay. Walk us through some of the thought process from Western to Leasing Desk. I guess sounds like Western was serving apartments as well.
So were they your first customer?
Yeah, they were our first customer. So they were, at one point the largest owner, operator, and manager of apartments in the state of California. They've since been surpassed by some other Wall Street-backed operations, but they had been around since the 60s. Were landlords. And just to back up a little bit, my parents were landlords. That was how I sort of learned the apartment business. So this intersection of real estate and technology is kind of an area that I'd operated in. I knew the apartment business from sort of the ground up. I had the pleasure of mowing lawns for my parents' apartment portfolio on Saturdays. We'd go clean apartments. And so I sort of learned the business and then had this affinity for computers and then kind of took those two things and put them together.
No, it's absolutely huge. You were really comfortable there. You understood it, you knew what was involved. Do you remember a moment, Dirk, where you said, that's the idea? Or was it really an evolution in the decision process?
It was really an evolution. One of the things that I was responsible for at Western National was an insurance program that we had put together. We were offering renter's insurance to people that came and rented apartments for us.
Yep.
It's a very manual process. We had a 3-part NCR form. The resident would fill it out, sign it, it'd tear a copy off. That became your proof of insurance. The pink copy would go in the leasing file, and then the yellow copy would go to the insurance carrier. Yeah. And we saw an opportunity to automate that, make it much more efficient, create some tracking capabilities, create more efficiency on the back end for the insurance company so they're not having to do all the data input and all those things. So that was really the genesis of Leasing Desk. Was this automation of a kind of core business process that we had at Western National.
So back to the decision point. So I'm curious, like when you said, okay, I'm going to go do this, and you had this revelation of I need to be an owner, not an employee. Like, was that a scary thing, or was it to Doug's point? Was it just somewhat evolutionary because you'd been in the space, around the space? It was just sort of like the logical next step. It wasn't this big scary thing, or was it a big scary thing?
It was a fairly scary thing. One of the things I ended up doing was, for better for worse, I became a minority owner in that business because I needed a paycheck. I did not have sufficient liquidity to be able to, and one of the things I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs about is you got to get your burn rate down. You should have enough capital and savings to be able to pay your bills for an extended period of time. I didn't have that. So I had to take on capital to start the business, and in that I gave away the lion's share of that business. So I was a minority owner in the business that I had started.
Of Leasing Desk.
Of Leasing Desk.
Yep.
It was scary for sure, but I was still able to draw a paycheck, and I sort of knew, look, if the whole thing kind of craters.
I can see the runway.
I can see, yeah, right.
How long I've got.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's coach there for a minute, because I can see and hear the entrepreneur listening right now. It worked out well. Did it? Because that's the chicken or the egg, right, Dirk? I got this great idea, but I got a mortgage, I got a family of kids, and I know everybody tells me that if I take on capital now, I'm going to regret it. But maybe you never start the business if you don't take on capital. So navigate that, coach around that.
I don't think I'd do it differently. I think for me, it was the right decision to have this sort of, it was almost a little bit like an intrapreneur, where I was sort of, I birthed it inside of kind of the four walls of Western National, and the plan was to go outside. But I had the support structure of that company. I had the customer base of that company. And so it wasn't the full, hey, we're just going to shut this down, quit my job, go hang my shingle as an entrepreneur and start coding, a web-based application.
I want to stay here for a minute because I think so many of our listeners that they've started or really have a desire to be an entrepreneur. How would you coach them? Would you say, do your best to build some cash reserves, but if that's not an option, give some pragmatics around that?
What I've encouraged many entrepreneurs to do would be to keep your day job as long as possible and take steps in your off hours to begin to build your business, to begin to get proof of concept, to begin to set up the infrastructure necessary to support your business, and then make that decision at the time when you think it's right. I think so many people want to say, you don't like working for somebody, I'm just going to quit, I'm going to go start up tomorrow. And it always takes 2, 3, 4 times as long as you think, and takes more capital than you think. And so having that safety net of a day job, of a paycheck, and keeping your burn rate to a moderate level. I see so many folks that get sort of, I call it ratcheted up with expenses and, fancy car and big house and, big apartment and all that stuff. You've got to really be able to live within a very tight boundary, because it does take a lot of capital, a lot more than you think.
Well, and then what happens too is if you do it the way you just described, you're on offense. If you do it the other way, you're on defense, right? And then your decision making as you're trying to make decisions and navigate and move forward, you have a defensive posture because your burn rate's high and you've got lots of expenses and there's lots of pressure. And whereas if the pressure's low, you can play offense a little bit more, and then you can have a really different posture, in terms of setting it up.
Walk us through Leasing Desk. So what's that journey and process look like?
Started a business, had a big, broad, hairy, audacious goal to automate the entire leasing workflow in apartments nationwide. We raised an initial round of capital. We burned through it in a year.
How much did you raise?
We raised about $2 million in the first round.
This is 2000?
This is in 2000.
Okay.
.com bubble bursts right about the same time we're running out of money. So we made a decision to what everybody now calls a pivot. We called it just staying in business. So we got rid of half the people. We narrowed the focus tremendously from this really broad thing to this very narrow thing, focused around insurance, raised a bridge round of capital to get us to profitability. That took about another 14 to 15 months. And then the other thing I coach entrepreneurs, get your business to a break even. Burn rate, particularly in this environment, is not desirable. You can't finance burn rates with debt where it's at today. So we got to a point where we were cash flow break even. That gave us a lot of optionality. And then it became a very slow organic build over the next 6, 7, 8 years.
What was that day like, Dirk, besides awful, when you let how many people was that? Where again, these are, slow to hire, quick to fire. Again, so many entrepreneurs listening. It's Walk us through some of that thought process of the decision, the moment you knew it had to be done, that whole sequence.
It was, it's a great question. I hadn't thought about it in a couple of years. It was very hard. You sell people on the vision. People come, they want to follow you. You know, you're saying we're going to change the world in our own little way. You're getting them to buy into your long-term and long-range plan, and you feel like you failed them. These are people that left good jobs to come to work for you in a startup, buying into your vision, and you know, you've got to go cut them loose, and it's hard. It's a lot of pressure, and you realize, look, I got to protect my family. In the meantime, I'm putting this fella or gal in a much harder position to take care of their family because we're having to cut them loose.
Coach up entrepreneurs on making those decisions and communicating that to team members.
I would say make the decision swiftly, be empathetic, own your part in it. I think the remaining people will respect you a lot more when you are as transparent as you can be, where you take responsibility for the things that were within your control, and then, in fact, a buddy of mine, a guy from Greenville, South Carolina, where I know you're from, has a saying that said, "The sun will come up the next day," and the initial day is rough. The next day, once the people that are remaining see that the sun comes up, it's a new day, and they get back to work.
No, 100%, and I loved the empathy and owning your part in it. And I think that just something, honesty kind of always wins, and it sets people free. It's stating the obvious, but sometimes whether it's pride or shame or just an inability to face it, it's not as transparent or relational as that. And so I think that it's a terrible situation, but I know it's critical to the health of organizations. Hanging on too long to team members, either certain team members or because the business can't support it, it's critical to the survival of young companies.
I want to come back to, I want to come to the end of the story with Lending Desk, right? Leasing Desk, sorry. I mean, as you know, Dirk, like, you have a vision. A lot of times it takes a lot of convincing, and really a lot of times people need data, they need inputs to be able to make the leap from where things are to where the vision, you know, they can't necessarily go there just based on your words. But when you have and I'll call it a failure, but you know, it's not a incriminating failure, but you know, when you have a failure of vision like that, what does it do to your own psychology as a leader in terms of, okay, now I got to go, the sun comes up the next day, I got to get back on, you know, the program, and I've got to continue to cast the vision for this team. What does it do to your own self-confidence in that moment, and how did you rebuild your own confidence to cast the vision for that remaining team to ultimately get where you guys wanted to go?
Yeah, look, it certainly affects your self-concept. You know, to think you're not defeated for an extended period of time, you know, I'd be lying to you. It for sure did. I think going back to the data, in our case, you know, we made a very conscious decision. We knew the monetization was based on the one key part that we were actually pretty good at. So once you sort of swallowed your pride and said, this is not going to be $1 billion business, this is going to be a great, you know, X $1 million business, we were able to really focus on that and had a very well-defined lane, and then just had a very clear path to execute. So the data, the refocusing, and then obviously getting out of your own way over a period of time.
You said it so casually, but I know there's lots of scar tissue and lessons. 2 times, 2 different ways. You said swallow your pride and get out of your way. So coach up entrepreneurs, because how do I know I'm in my own way?
In my day job today, we work in our firm with many founder entrepreneurs. We back them financially and with our value creation methodology. And so, you know, I have the pleasure now of working with other entrepreneurs, and, you know, many of them, was, I would say, what got you to, you know, $20 million isn't going to get you to $100 million. And what got them to 20 was a lot of piss and vinegar, a lot of instinct, a lot of brute force. And typically going from 20 to 100, it's not those same attributes that get you there. It's much more sort of pragmatic, data-driven, systematic, process and scale. And so, as we coach entrepreneurs, getting them sort of the same thing, swallowing your pride, getting out of your own way, is a big part of what I do now.
I want to go right there because I think so many of our listeners probably lead $10 to $20 million organizations. So, Dirk, as much secret sauce as you're willing, what are those things a business owner, entrepreneur, what are those pragmatic things? You said people's, processes, data. Take them now. You've got a room just on the edge. They've been stuck at 20 million for 2 years. Get them to 80.
A big part of doing that, in my opinion, is getting your team right. It's very easy as an entrepreneur to hire people around you that see the world the way you do, that think the way you do, but they're very rarely maybe not the team that's going to take you to 80. You need that healthy conflict, people that are going to challenge your decision-making, people that are going to challenge your thinking. And that's many times a different set of athletes. And it's a tough decision to make where you may have somebody who's been with you since day one, and they were an integral part of your success to $20 million. Doesn't mean they're a bad person, but they may not be the right person to lead an enormous functional part of your business. You may need to break that up and give that portion of it to a new person coming into the company that's got some experience, that's seen 80 or $100 million of scale and can bring that process in.
How do I find them? I mean, because that's so spot on. I'm assuming it's these same people are going to get me there. Now all of a sudden you're suggesting I interview someone who might push back on me. How do I start to identify that right kind of person?
Look into your network, find people that have seen scale at or above where you're trying to get to, and bring them in and define a lane for them. And as one of my mentors said, set the expectations and get out of their way. And that's a hard thing for many entrepreneurs because they're very used to controlling every detail and every aspect of their business. Command and control. And to be able to say, I need you to go focus on these 3 things. Here's the 3 metrics that matter. Here's what I'm going to hold you accountable for. Set that expectation and get out of their way and come back and see them in 60 days and see how they're doing.
Well, so just a little simple example on this topic is, you take a really good finance guy. And when you're going from 0 to 10 or 0 to 20, your finance guy's number one job is to just figure out how to spend as little money as possible.
Burn rate down.
Right. But then when you're trying to go from 20 to 100, your finance guy has to have a completely different lens on how to manage the finances of the business, because it's no longer how little can I spend, because you're not going to go from 20 to 100 if that's your mentality and mindset. You have to have a completely different mindset. And the person in the seat may be able to transition, but it may be a completely different person that has that different, still a strong finance person, but just a different lens of what it's going to take.
And many entrepreneurs early on, they'll hire more accounting-centric people that are sort of paying bills and making sure we're getting money coming in from receivables and those sorts of things. But if you want to grow from 20 to 100, maybe you need to bring in outside capital. Maybe there's now managing a lender relationship. Those are different skills than somebody who, sets up and has a bias towards, financial reporting and giving you the data you need to make decisions in the business, as opposed to, strategically thinking about the finance function and how we can bring capital in, put it to work with the highest return.
So we talked about team, people that got you to 20. They may still be with you, but they may not sit in the same seats, or there's going to be additional people to the team, some healthy conflict. What else? What are the other pragmatic pieces to get that growth?
So in our firm, we talk a lot about our value creation methodology, which is fairly well refined. I mean, we've invested in hundreds of businesses over the years, and we've got, we used to call it a playbook. We no longer call it a playbook, but
what do you call it now?
I call it a knowledge base of really best practices of things that have worked over the hundreds of companies that we've done. And as I joke with even our entrepreneurs, I say, look, there's nothing in these best practices. They're things that you and I couldn't sit down on a whiteboard and write down in 10 minutes. It's really the implementation systematically of those, the prioritization of those, and the conviction that we know they work. and sort of that unwavering commitment to developing or fixing some process within your business. So, sort of the people and then the system side, and that's what we do as investors, bring those best practices to bear, and very surgically and deliberately help the leaders of the company implement them.
So Dirk, you talk about this knowledge base. Are there 6 buckets, 12 buckets? Coach us up. What are those first 90 days look like when you've acquired or made a significant investment in a company?
I'm going to back up and give you a little context here. I became fascinated with Vista in my days working at RealPage. So Leasing Desk, we sold that business to RealPage. I moved to Texas. We had a great run with Steve Wynn. He's a local entrepreneur here. Took the company public, and everybody made some money in that transaction. Along the way, we were bidding on an asset that was a competitive software business that we made an offer to buy. I still remember, this is at RealPage. The company was called MRI Software. It's still around. At the time, it was doing about $9 million in EBITDA. We made a bid for $99 million to buy it, so call it 10 times EBITDA. And we were going to merge it into RealPage, and as part of our acquisition strategy that we were working there. We got outbid by a then up-and-coming firm called Vista Equity Partners. They paid $125 million to buy MRI Software. And we looked back and said, these guys have no idea what they're doing. They've overpaid by 25%. They're never going to get a return on the business. They have no idea what they're doing. And we watched as competitors Vista systematically create value in that business, very intentionally and very deliberately. And that's where I became fascinated with, how do they do what they do?
How do they pay 25% more than what we felt like was market and be successful?
What year is this?
This is in about 2009, I guess.
Okay.
One of the things that we later understood they did was this very focused definition of their target customer. We call it CapDB. That's our best practice around customer segmentation. But MRI knew that their best customers had 3 attributes. They had commercial, they had residential, they had industrial. And if the target customer had those, they were going to win the deal and we were going to lose. And we were 5 times their size. And we had 100 sellers and they had 20. The way they won with their 20 sellers was quickly pulling out of deals that they knew they couldn't win, and focusing on deals they knew they had a high right to win. And we now call that CapDB. It's a best practice. We do it very early in almost all of our companies.
CapDB?
It stands for Customer and Prospect Database.
Okay.
So it's really a targeted kind of initial customer profile. We build it with algorithms. We say, where are you winning? Where are you losing? And not just where do you win, but who are the highest long-term value customers? Mm-hmm. You may win it, but you might lose it next year.
Correct.
So which are the customers that you win in, that you have the highest return on investment, and the ones you keep the longest? I think so many companies we see, particularly earlier companies, they want to win, and so they're trying to win every single match, every single deal, every single opportunity. And being more deliberate about that is one of the things we find is the way we can invest in companies that may not be the market leader. They may be the number 2 or the number 3 leader, and the way we can win is by being very targeted for who we're going after.
Mm-hmm.
Vista, because they had a knowledge base, they were able, from your perspective, when they evaluated MRI, they clearly understood there was more value there than you all were able to diagnose.
Through cost efficiency, through targeted customer acquisition, they spent a lot of time transitioning out of lower margin service offerings into more higher margin software margin products. And sort of the shift from services to software, the very targeted customer acquisition, being more. So one best practice is this kind of CapDB. It's this targeted customer. The flip side of that is the the road mapping process, and what are we building and what's the ROI on that. And I think a lot of times earlier companies will want to, oh, we should go build this or we should go build that. We're going to spend $1 million to go add these 3 new features into our application. We break that down into several buckets to say, is that investment going to reduce our operating cost? Is it going to improve our win rate? Is it going to reduce our support cost? Or is it going to expand our ability to generate more revenue? And so saying, if we're going to put $1 million in, what are we getting out of that? Are we going to get, look, we're going to be able to support the product for less cost? Are we going to be able to win more? Can we improve our win rate from 25% to 30%? And what does that translate into? So this very sort of systematic focus on what are we building, what's the investment, what's the return, as opposed to we think the market wants this, or my instincts tell me I should go build that.
You have 4 grid points that you kind of make a bulk of the decisions on, whether new investment or new opportunities. Is that right?
Yes.
Will you re-say those 4?
So it would be, boy, you're going to challenge me now.
I am.
So can we improve our win rates?
Yep.
Can we improve our average cost or average revenue per opportunity? So can we charge more because we've got more features? Are we reducing our support cost, so our internal cost to deliver the product? And then I guess the 4th one would be around just some of the technical hosting costs and the AWS and Azure type costs.
Well, I think that's so important because, again, entrepreneurs, we've had several, we get attracted to new shiny things sometimes, but to have a proven metric, okay, team, before we do this, does it, how many, and then you all decide it needs to check all 4 boxes, it needs to check 1 or 2, but you have a really decision-making grid.
And we put each of them into an ROI. So what's the cost, what's the return in year 1, year 3, year 5. Stack them all up with a power score, so we'll score them, and then draw a chalk line and say, here's the things that we're going to do, and if we want to allocate more resource to development, we can do that. If we want to do less, we can do that, and then we're making an informed decision around what's the right amount of capital to put towards product development and our future roadmap. Frankly, the businesses that we invest in today are better run than the businesses that we invested in 20 years ago. So today, companies are on modern cloud infrastructure, they're on modern business operating systems, they're on modern technology stacks. And so the value creation is much more targeted than it was maybe 20 years ago when you're dealing with Gen 1 kind of software companies that were, kind of birthed in the 80s and were maybe poorly run and hadn't focused on, process efficiency and those sorts of things. And so, the switch from let's go do these 30 things to, hey, let's go do these 3 or 4 things really well was part, I think, the evolution of the investment universe.
Dirk, let's go back for a minute and let's go back to the transition from Leasing Desk to RealPage, and then ultimately the RealPage to what came next. And I feel like there was a gap in there between RealPage and Vista, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So just some of these transition periods, which would also be decision points, if you will.
So we had a nice going concern at Leasing Desk. We'd built a business of moderate scale, and RealPage came knocking on the door and said, hey, we're looking to build out additional product suite. You've got an interesting attachment. We've got all these customers. We think they would love to use your product. And so they made an offer to buy the business. It was a very tough decision because it was a decision. I had investors that wanted to build a business for cash flow, and they sort of, they were real estate people and they like cash flow, and they sort of felt like if we were on the current path, they could build a great business that would, provide a nice cash flow for them. Unfortunately, as a minority owner of the business, my minority cash flow was not the exit that I was looking for. And so I lobbied very hard to go through with the transaction with RealPage. It was a cash and stock deal. So I was going to take some RealPage stock, and all the investors were going to get some RealPage stock, and we were going to get cash. And in about the 9th hour, the investors came to me and said, we've made a decision. We want to take all the cash, and we want you to have all the stock. And so it was a small liquidity event. I got some cash. I got enough cash to cover my tax bill. I got enough cash to pay off my house.
What is Leasing Desk grossing at this time? How many team members do you have?
We probably had 40 some people, and it was, call it a 10 million ARR business, something like that. So we had built it into a nice business and sort of a category leader. But RealPage was pre-IPO. It was a privately held company. It was venture backed, and so I had to make a decision at that point. Should I just stay and keep with the cash flow business, or am I going to really double down and take a bunch of RealPage stock and a little bit of cash and get my investors their money back? And so, made the decision. And it was one of the better decisions I made. Having now the RealPage platform, having access to customers all over the country, really accelerated the growth of the business. I always say today, I think it's one of the largest divisions of that company.
When you made that decision, did it feel risky to roll so much equity into RealPage, or was it sort of like, I see this and I know where this thing is going to go, and it really didn't feel like that much risk?
It felt incredibly risky.
Okay,
and
good.
As one of my mentors, who was the gentleman that hosted the dinner that I mentioned earlier in Park City, said at the time, he said, "Dirk, this is just a stepping stone to the next thing. This is not your final exit. There's going to be 5 more. And you're viewing this as, am I making the final right decision in my life?"
Was he one of the investors in Leasing Desk?
He was also one of the investors in Leasing Desk.
This is so good, Dirk, because so many entrepreneurs, they think this the
is
first
it.
one, correct. He or she helps you make this decision.
Absolutely. He's getting a little bit of cash. He was a minority investor. He got a little bit of cash.
Did he roll any RealPage?
He had already, ironically, had an investment in RealPage. He was a separate investor in RealPage at the time.
Was this conversation hard from the investors? Was it kind of Dirk ultimatum? You either take this deal or you keep running Leasing Desk.
It was a very difficult deal. And I would say to this day, I don't think that relationship has ever been completely repaired. I mean, it's 20 some years later, and it was a very emotional, you're either with us or you're not with us. And having to sort of make the leap into the next lily pad, knowing that the one that I just left may not be there, was a tough decision.
Mm-hmm.
Do they regret not taking RealPage stock?
I don't know the answer to that. They've done fine. There was a moment where, once we took RealPage public, they knew how many shares of RealPage I had.
Because that's all you got.
And they could run the math pretty quickly, look at the ticker symbol, run the stock. And there was a moment where I probably could have gloated and sent back the letter and said, "You guys made the wrong decision."
That's not
my
who you are,
sensibilities got the
though.
best of me, and I chose not to do that.
Yeah, and that's
Well, those letters. Sometimes a letter needs to be a diary where you need to write it and then you fold it up and you throw it away and you never send it. And that's called wisdom.
Yeah. So go back for a second to Mike's contribution to this decision, and hey, this isn't your only exit. This isn't it. This is the beginning of the next leg of the journey. Mike
coached me on that, and as I started to allude to, in a weird way, Mike is now an entrepreneur, and I'm now his mentor.
No way.
He calls me for advice, helping me with his business and how he's thinking about it. He's had several exits.
That's great.
And he's in his fourth or fifth rodeo, if you will. And so part of the Park City trip was this, as he called it, his board of directors meeting, board, B-O-A-R-D, like snowboard, of directors meeting. And
But I love, he's older than you.
He's older than me.
And he's starting another business.
We often say you can't take entrepreneurship out of the entrepreneur. And, guys, if they exit in their 40s or early 50s or mid 50s or maybe even early 60s and even beyond, they can't really just go to the house. Like, they've got to, there's this gear that, it's part of who they are. It's part of how they're wired, and they got to keep going. And it's oftentimes why we say the exit might not be the answer. Oftentimes it is, but sometimes the answer is, you know what? You just need to keep scaling this thing because you love it. You have a passion for it. It's fulfilling. You're doing great work. you got to keep going.
Steve Wynn, who was the founder of RealPage, he since exited. They took it private several years ago, and I had lunch with him a couple of months back. And he's off on a new venture. I mean, he's got 20 years on me, but he's got a whole thing around entertainment complexes and trying to build mini versions of the Sphere, if you will, around town. He's building one up in Frisco, and again, it's just in his blood. He's got a passion, and he wants to go pursue it. And it would not having that would, I think, be the demise of him.
Yeah, purpose. We have kind of 4 pillars that we talk about in entrepreneurs and pre-transaction planning, and one of those clearly is kind of the personal coaching, but just having purpose is significant. Did you know Mike was going to talk to us about a mentor? I'm an entrepreneur. I can easily find myself isolated. Speak to some pragmatic ways to have someone to help you.
That vulnerability is something that I think needs to be innate to anybody that wants to be in business. You have to have the little bit of the bravado, but you also have to have the humility and a little of that vulnerability. And Mike was the guy at that point in my career, was the person I would call when something wasn't going right, and I'd say, Mike, something's not right here. And every single time, he'd talk me off the ledge. I'll never forget one of the conversations. I got frustrated. We had a competitor that was getting a little traction, and I was real frustrated because we were trying to change the world. We had this whole big, hairy, audacious goal, and I thought somebody else is encroaching on my goal. They're trying to take some of my cheese. And Mike, I'll never forget, he said to me, Dirk, if somebody's not trying to do what you're trying to do, it may not be worth doing. So in other words, if you don't have a competitor, maybe if you're the only guy trying to do it, maybe there's something wrong with what you're trying to do. That should tell you something.
Yeah.
It's so truthful. It's so disarming too. Walk us through, how many years now are you at RealPage, and then what led you to the exit to Vista and the gap in between there?
Yeah, so sold the business in 2007, moved to Texas in 2009. We took RealPage public in 2010 or 2011. It was a very successful IPO. By about 2012, I was starting to think about what was next. Steve made it pretty clear he was the CEO of the company. Mm-hmm. He was going to be the CEO of the company, and there wasn't a co-CEO opportunity for me. And so I made a decision.
What is your role at that point?
I was president, so had basically full P&L responsibility for all the products, et cetera, and part of the leadership team. And so I made a decision to quote retire in 2012 and figure out what I was going to do next. I knew I had a little more gas left in the tank, had another run or two in me. Felt like that had kind of run its course. I also figured, private equity would come into the business at some point and do a lot of the modernization and optimization that I was watching companies like Vista do. And I sort of wanted to be part of that optimization phase of a business, maybe not of RealPage, but of another business. And so made a decision to leave without a whole lot of ideas. It was, I'd worked every day since I was 11 years old, throwing papers through the day we exited the business, and I wanted to wake up and not have anything to do for a little while. So use that opportunity to recharge my batteries and spend a little time with my family.
And how long was that window where you were waking up, not having anything to do? And I know that you had stuff to do.
I had stuff to do, but my wife at the time was, I think about 3 months in, she was like, when are you going to get back to work? Like, this is getting real old.
Or just get out of the house.
Just get out of the house. Exactly.
I don't care what you go do.
Yeah, it was getting under her skin. She had a good little vibe going, and I was encroaching on her ability to do what she liked to do every day. But I had a 1 year non-compete with RealPage. I got a call about 10 months into that non-compete, and Vista called and wanted me to go run MRI, the company that I had looked at from the outside. Wow. And sort of was intrigued by.
So you had stayed in touch with Vista?
They actually reached out to me.
Okay.
They reached out to me, and I said, look, I got a non-compete. I can't start until January 15th of whatever the year was, 2013, 2014. And they said, great, no problem, we'll wait for you. We want you to come do this. And so we were in actually Munich, Germany at the time. I'll never forget. It was in Munich, got the phone call from the partner at Vista, kind of worked through it over the next couple of months. And Katie, my wife, was not feeling great in Munich, Germany. And over the kind of parallel paths of negotiating with Vista and Katie, turns out she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer during that sort of November, December timeframe. And so the decision point in all this was I made a decision to not go to MRI because Katie at the time was going through and going to have to go through chemotherapy and radiation and a full hysterectomy and all those things. And so the decision was to spend time with my family in, a very important and difficult part of with her needs. And so I chose not to take the MRI job and chose not to go join Vista at the time. Chose to spend time with Katie, and turned out to be absolutely the right decision. She's no longer with us. We lost her a couple of years ago, 7 years ago, I guess. But I guess the takeaway is, that time was precious, and I have no regrets about spending time with her, during those kind of rough couple of years for her.
Thanks for your courage. And Dirk, I think there's a lot I'm going to take away from today, but your wisdom, and now I sense where more of this all comes from, the bravado and vulnerability. That's a heck of a combination. And for you to have the wisdom, the rightness to say no, because sometimes we just get selfish and we think, I got to stay busy, and maybe it's the best thing for the family. But for you just to say, no, I want to be with Katie.
Or if I don't take this, I'm damaged goods. I'm out of the game. Opportunities have passed me by, and there's not going to be anything for me when this next chapter closes. Yeah.
Talk to entrepreneurs, super busy people, about priorities and decision making and family, and you clearly have a unique perspective.
I don't know if it's the right perspective. I certainly do believe, and I've had several experiences throughout my life and career that sort of is the what's it all about. One of the founders at Western National, I'm probably going way too deep.
No,
here's
you're not.
overtime.
You're not. That's why this clock doesn't matter. So it really doesn't.
He was one of my mentors before Mike. He was a genius of a businessman and very cost focused, cost optimization. He was very maniacal about running our apartment portfolio very efficiently and very cost effectively. And he was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder very early in his life. He was still a fairly young man, and I went to visit him when he was sick up at his house at a beautiful home up in Palos Verdes. And I walk into his bedroom, and he's sitting there, and we all knew he didn't have a whole lot of time left. And he was laying in bed. He had the Wall Street Journal. He had CNBC on. He had this little BlackBerry device that would give him stock quotes in real time. He had a notebook full of general ledgers for the apartments that he would go through with a red pen and circle things that he wanted answers on. And I'm looking at this going, here's a guy who's worked his whole life. He's got more money than he can ever spend, and he's probably got 2 months to live, and his passion is laying in bed, analyzing expenses for apartments, watching CNBC to see what's going on with interest rates. His wife walks in and says, "Oh, hey, Dirk, how's it going?" I said, "Jackie, great to see you." And, she's got her tennis outfit on, and she's going to go off and play tennis. And I'm thinking, this is just crazy. And it was that sort of kind of what's it all worth, and when are you going to enjoy your life a little bit? And, Jerry's not with us any longer. But it's still to this day stuck with me, where do I want to be the guy with 2 months to live, laying in bed, worrying about who's spending money on what apartments, or do I want to be spending it with my wife and let's go take a trip to Europe, or, let me go watch you play tennis? Where then do you engage with Vista in that journey? So I got a call from another one of my now mentors who was running a company for Vista, and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a GM to go run this aspect of our business." And I said, "Well, you should call this guy." So I gave him the name of a fellow to call. And he calls me back and said, "Hey, come on over on Tuesday. I want to talk to you about this guy." So we go to his house here in town, and he opens up a really nice bottle of wine and throws a couple burgers on the grill. And so we're, enjoying a beautiful French Bordeaux and eating some, way too high caloric burgers. And about halfway into the conversation, he said, look, I want to hire you to come be my general manager. And I said, well, look, the Vista thing's kind of run its course. And he said, nah, I don't think so. He goes, why don't you come over and spend a little time? And so he recruited me in to be his COO at his business within Vista at the time. And it became my opportunity to, quote unquote, learn the offense.
Now, is Katie still alive at this point?
Katie is still alive at this point. We got her through the first round of chemotherapy. She was 3 years cancer-free, and we were kind of getting back into the swing of things. And I guess it was about 2 more years, and then we lost her. She got a second primary cancer, came real quick.
So you take about 3 years, and you and Katie spend time together, and you all fight together.
Spent time together. We took a couple of trips and got her through her first round of chemo and radiation and the hysterectomy, and she was on the mend.
What's that company you move into?
It's a company called Lanyon.
Okay.
It's now part of Cvent, which is a large event platform. Vista also invested in Cvent and put the two businesses together.
And then you moved from that company officially into Vista when?
President COO at Lanyon, took another COO job at another Vista company for about 2 years, and then got asked to go lead a business called Paylease, which was back in the real estate technology space, and then ran that for about 3 years for Vista. Built a great business there, had a great exit, to a great strategic buyer, and got asked to join Vista on kind of the dark side, as I call it, shortly after that.
I know this is so good, and I've got at least one more question, then we can kind of start to land the plane. We named this decision points. We talked right before we started, Dirk, that the only filter is we've got business leaders, entrepreneurs sitting right next to us listening. I think my final question, and if Scott has anything else, what does that first 90 days with Vista look like? How could I, as an entrepreneur today, be prepared to receive a phone call for Vista?
So we're going to spend the first 90 days spending a lot of time around creating what we call a value creation plan. And it's a multi-year sort of, what do we have to do to get to an investment return? What are the things that we have to get right in this business to get a return on the investment? And so we're going to spend a lot of time on whiteboards and focusing on the 2 to 3 to 4 things that really move the needle in that business. And we're going to put them on a piece of paper. We're going to assign responsibilities, and then we're going to maniacally measure the progress against that plan over the next 2 to 3 years.
So I would say my last question would be, so you founder, entrepreneur, owner, startup, employee, private equity, like you've worn all the hats, right? And so maybe, out of all those experiences wearing the different hats and different aspects, what's one piece of advice or 1 or 2 things that you might give this room of business owners and entrepreneurs to I can just give you some, free advice, here it is.
Number 1, it's never as bad as you think it is. I think we hold ourselves to incredibly high standards. Businesses are incredibly resilient things and can sustain a lot of disruption. And so, what seems like a very potentially catastrophic event is probably not as bad as you think it is. I also, in what I do, I'm very focused on getting the team right and having that. I know we talked a little bit about team health, talked about healthy conflict. I think organizations that get that right with the right athletes, that have the right chemistry, that have the right ability to lift one another and to challenge one another can do great things. And so I talk a lot to entrepreneurs about, talk to me about your team, your organizational design, who's responsible for what things, how do they hold one another accountable to get great results. And that's how you build a business that will succeed beyond your tenure and your custodianship. So if you were to remove yourself and the business continues to thrive with the team that's there, you've created a great business. If the business atrophies the day you leave, then you haven't got the team right, and you haven't built a business that can be multi-generational or sustain your your departure.
It's incredible, an amazing answer. Is there an operational tool that you utilize? We use a thing called EOS. Is there one that you have a go-to?
We don't use EOS. I'm familiar with EOS. I'm big on operational dashboards, and so we do a lot with our CEOs around, what are you looking at to instrument the business, and who's accountable for those metrics, and it's similar to EOS.
But you're essentially customizing one
That's right.
for each. You're not, yeah. It's awesome. Thank you for your vulnerability, your leadership, your transparency. To me, if you've been watching or listening, I just think, Dirk, I know you ain't perfect. Nobody is, but I really appreciate the demeanor to which, and I know I always say perspective generally comes at a high cost. So I know you and your family still celebrate and grieve Katie, but thank you for being here on Decision Points.